So I wanted to talk today a little bit about the different types of meditation. And I'm going to classify them in terms of higher and lower, but this doesn't mean that I'm talking about some meditations being better than others. Whether a meditation is good or bad very much depends upon the student, their disposition, and also their motivation, what their aims and objectives are. But also, primarily, it depends upon the teacher-student relationship. And so a teacher could use any method to tame their student if they're very familiar with that student's character and the way they think. So how am I going to classify these meditations? Well, I'm classifying them in terms of which are more effective for bringing about the end result of liberation from samsara. And what is this liberation? Well, this is a freedom from all clinging. When I say all clinging, I mean freedom from clinging to self and to phenomena. But this has to be done in an unmistaken and authentic manner. And by unmistaken, I mean in a way which doesn't fall to the two extremes. And these two extremes are the extremes of realism and nihilism, or existence and non-existence. So here I'm not classifying these meditations in terms of which ones are good or bad, but in terms of those which are more effective at bringing about this end result of final liberation from the mundane world. And again, depending on the skill of the teacher, then they can use any method whatsoever. It doesn't even have to be meditation. They can just use everyday activities like chopping wood and arranging flowers. Could be anything. But this is something that really has to happen one-to-one. It can't be something that is a one-size-fits-all kind of remedy to all our problems. It doesn't really work that way. If the teacher has skill, then the teacher can tame the mind of the student. And this is based on the teacher and the student having a very close relationship. So sometimes spiritual teachers develop a kind of methodology, kind of program plan, 20 steps. And it's a very generalized way of teaching the spiritual path. But this, more often than not, isn't 100% effective. So anyway, what is the first classification? Well, that is induction. Now, you may be familiar with induction if you have ever done a yoga class. Because generally, at the end of the session, then the teacher will ask you to lie down and they'll do something what we call a relaxation. You lie down or get comfortable and close your eyes, and then the teacher will guide you through a kind of visualization. There are linguistic prompts. So they'll say, close your eyes gently, turn your attention inwards, relax the body, imagine that you're lying in the sand of a desert island. There's the sound of the ocean gently lapping against the shore. The sun is warm in the sky and there is a gentle breeze that is just touching the skin. And in the trees you can hear the sounds of little birds singing. So in this way, then the teacher induces an artificial feeling into the student. And why do I say this is an artificial feeling? It's because it's not naturally arising out of the student's own understanding or experience. We're inducing this in another, and it's a type of hypnotism. It's a way of encouraging the student to relax and to calm their mind, to still their mind. And why is it less effective for the end results of final liberation? And that's because it's something that has to be induced by the suggestions of a teacher. But there's a problem here, because it's very easy to get attached to this. If your teacher has this power, and they can induce feelings of well-being upon you, and then you can become attached to that, and you can crave that as well. And not only that, when you go out into the normal world and you encounter difficulties, then you can feel a kind of aversion to difficult circumstances. And this is counterproductive in the long run for the spiritual path. And it's not only that you would use visual prompts in language to cause this kind of induction, because a very skillful yoga teacher can just use simple instructions about placement of the body to bring about the exact same types of results. They can place the body into a very relaxed and undisturbed way. And as we know, then the mind follows the body. It's like a reflection of the body. So if the body is very relaxed, then the mind also becomes relaxed. When I was studying Tai Chi, then one of my teachers gave this kind of visual guided meditation. It was a type of induction. And she just simply asked us to visualize the smiling face of an old granny looking down upon us with love and compassion. So in this way, we get this feeling of being cared for and loved, and it makes us feel happy, and it gives us a sense of well-being. But again, these are artificial feelings that are being instilled in us. And so there are many different ways of inducing someone into an artificial feeling. And it doesn't have to merely be visual suggestions. It can also be placement of the body. But likewise, you can also give ideas and concepts to someone. Or you can sort of repeat a philosophical view. Now, the example here I'm going to use is from a video by Rupert Spira called The Pathless Path. And now you might think that I'm always kind of picking on Rupert, and I'm not. It's just he has a lot of things online, so I have something I can refer to on YouTube. And by that, then I can kind of make a comparison. So he has a very good example of this. And so what he says is, try to let go of the idea, and more importantly, the feeling that there is a path to tread or a journey to undertake. So he's making kind of statements. They're philosophical statements. It's his view, it's his point of view about spirituality, and he's inducing the student with these ideas. And it's not significantly different than getting somebody to visualize a beach in the Mediterranean or something like that. And it's also no different, really, than just asking somebody to place their body in a certain way. What you're doing is you're inducing a feeling into someone. And so the students will be able to relate to his philosophical view and also possibly some of the teachings they've received. And then, by closing their eyes and relaxing and listening to his voice, they can be induced into a kind of sensation or an artificial feeling. Now, this seems to be very much what J. Krishnamurti used to do in his teachings. He would say he was not a teacher, he was not the guru, but it was very clear that through his eloquence and the sweetness of his voice, then he was able to kind of hypnotize his students, if you can call them students. And by this, they entered into a kind of induced meditation. So Rupert is suggesting here that you should let go of the idea that there is any path to tread or journey to undertake. Now, why would you say this to your students? I mean, you could say it to convince them that there's nothing to do, to be lazy. But it's not really that. I think for many Westerners, they need this kind of instruction because from a young age, we are taught to be very competitive and we're sort of overachievers. We're overly goal-oriented. And in that way, that becomes an obstacle to our practice. So by saying this, there's nothing to do, there's no path to tread, then people are able to let go of this idea that they need to practice. So he continues, there is no distance between the self we seem to be and the self we truly are. So again, these are philosophical ideas, they are concepts, and they are being suggested to the student. And then the student, by contemplating on these, can enter into a sort of induced trance or a sensation of well-being. And therefore, there is no room for practice, effort, or discipline. I don't really think he's saying you don't need to be disciplined, because really we all have to be careful about our conduct. The problem is it could be interpreted in that way. Now, most modern spiritual traditions are based around personality cults. They're not really based around a sort of valid or authentic teaching. And we see this because once the teacher is passed on, then it's seldom that these teachings remain in any pure form or they carry on in a lineage. Now, when I say a personality cult, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be quite benign. For example, in Rupert's case, he's got a little community around them, and it's very much about his personality. And through his personality and his eloquence, then he has great influence over his students, and he's able to induce these feelings in them. The problem is that everything depends upon the teacher. So when the teacher isn't there, it's very difficult for students to develop this feeling. And also, it's a contrived feeling. It's an artificial feeling. And there's another problem, and that's because, in general, once the teacher passes on from this life, then there's a huge spiritual vacuum left behind in the community. Many of these communities kind of slowly disappear. They dissipate, after the teacher dies. And then also if they persist, it's usually because they already have some sort of established institution, for example, in the Osho community. But the problem is that that institution takes over the guidance of the community. And for example, in Osho's case, then it's become basically a commercial venture. I mean, the way it seems to me, from having been to Pune, that it's sort of an adult spiritual Disneyland. And it's very, very commercial. And I don't think Osho was like that. He talked a lot about meditation. He was kind of seemingly a very spiritual individual. So there's this first type of meditation, and it's induction. And there's many different ways of inducing somebody. You can even do it through ordinary activities. It's planting suggestions. And there's a problem with this because through suggestion, then often what students do, especially if they have faith for their teacher, is that when they sit down in meditation, then they try to fabricate something. And fabrication in meditation is generally a really bad idea because you're just generating false ideas. You're just adding new concepts into your mind. And these are a great obstacle to the spiritual path. Now, the second type of meditation is this shamatha. So it's what we call calm abiding or sort of resting in tranquility. And there are many types of this meditation. There's many different methods that you can use to achieve this, but this is probably the broadest category of meditation there is. Most meditations fall into this category, and this first one of induction also really falls into this category of shamatha, because what you're doing is you're focusing on the voice of the teacher and their suggestions to create a kind of a feeling of stillness or peace. But it's not necessarily the case that this induction meditation can only be used to make somebody feel very calm and relaxed. You could say, for example, imagine you're sitting stark naked on top of a snow mountain and the wind is howling in your ears. If your teacher said that to you, then you'd feel very uncomfortable and kind of vulnerable, right? So the teacher can induce anything into the student. And if it's a sort of negative relationship, then the teacher can also cause those students to act in a very negative way, as happened in Charles Manson's community. But anyway, I'm not going to go there. This second type is shamatha, or shine in Tibetan, and it means calm abiding. And there's basically three types of this, as far as I can see, or there's kind of three results or three aims within shamatha. The primary one is stilling the mind. That's the main thing. And really that's what this term means. This calm abiding means to still or calm the mind. And what it is, it's a reduction of distraction to these sort of sense objects. The outer sense objects and also the mental sense object, which is concepts and ideas. And then the second category within shamatha is to develop mental acuity, kind of to sharpen your awareness. Now, this second one seems to be what most modern spiritual traditions are focusing on. I mean, in the West, they talk about this sort of heightened awareness or higher consciousness. But really what this is this a mental exercise to make one more aware, to increase one's mindfulness. And increasing your mindfulness is incredibly important on any spiritual path. Those who have no mental acuity, who can't focus or remain focused on anything, they just wander and drift here and there, and they're easily affected by anything that comes along. They fall sway to their emotions very easily, and so they're not able to practice spirituality. The third one of these is shamatha used in a way to reduce our gross negative tendencies. These are what we call kleshic obscurations. But there's no significant difference between these three, and it's not certain which result you will gain from your shamatha. It will help you still the mind, it will also help you increase the power of your mind. Hopefully there will also be this reduction in our kind of very coarse or gross negative tendencies. Now, induction meditation isn't so effective in this, and that's because it kind of depends on another. And not only does it depend on another, it's very easy to become attached to that. And this attachment itself is a gross negative tendency. So what kind of techniques do we use for this shamatha meditation? Well, it's all things we're familiar with. We focus on the breath, on a candle, or we focus on an inner visualization. You know, we have this sort of Vajrayana visualizations. You can focus on expansive awareness, or sort of infinite space. Any of these are grouped within this category of shamatha. Now, in the Tibetan tradition, we tend to work with what is easier first, and then we work towards that which is more difficult. And so, for example, when we're practicing this stabilizing of the mind, we might start with just a little black stone. It's something that's very, very easy to focus on. And after that, you'll move on to a white stick or a candle, and then eventually you'll meditate on the space in the room, or the space in a whole valley, or infinite space. So in this way, you develop your skill step by step. And these are all part of the progressive path. Whether you're focusing on concepts, ideas, like there is no self, or focusing on I am aware, whatever it is, these are all forms of shamatha, and they're all part of the progressive path. So why do we need these three qualities? Well, we have to still the mind. If your mind is very agitated and it's just going here and there, you're thinking about all kinds of things, then there's no way for you to gain any kind of stability. And there's also no way for you to practice the Dharma. As we say, we want to sort of rest in the unborn I, rest in the I unconditioned. Well, you're not going to be able to rest if you're thinking about all sorts of things. So this progressive method is to help you to still the mind, to calm it, and stop it from being distracted to outer objects. And the second quality is developing mental acuity. And so for this, we have to gain control over our mind. If you look at the 8 limbs of yoga, then you know one of these points is concentration. And so this meditation is very, very powerful at helping us gain concentration. And it's not the case that the prior one, induction, will help us to develop this mental acuity, because we just become focused on the words of the teacher. And this induction meditation, more often than not, for most people, becomes kind of like what we do with little children when we want them to quieten down and go to sleep. We'll tell them stories, right? So they will become relaxed and it's easier for them to go to sleep. And then if they're very, very upset, we'll say things like, it's okay, don't worry, everything's okay. So this is like the induction that Rupert Spira is using. It's like the way we treat little children to get them to be more calm. But it's not as effective as somebody proactively using shamatha in their meditation to focus on an object. Whether it be a candle or stone or whatever it is, we can develop stillness in the mind, and not only that, we can develop this mental acuity. By having to focus on an object, we become more skilled at concentration. So it's very much like physical training. If I wanted to do a marathon, for example, it'd be very difficult. I'm out of shape. I would have to train a lot. I'd have to do a lot of running. And so this shamatha is a very practical mental exercise that allows us to gain some strength of mind. And with this strength of mind, then we can engage in the more difficult stages of the Dharma. For example, looking into what is self, what is identity, what is awareness, these sort of things. If you don't have this mental acuity, and you don't have some stability or stillness in the mind, then you're never going to be able to look at what consciousness is, what thought is, because you'll continually be carried away and you won't be able to focus on one thing. So this third type of shamatha is this reduction of the gross negative tendencies. And for this, then there generally are slightly different techniques. And one of them is to just rest in the present moment. Don't think about the past. Don't think about the future. Or in the Zen tradition, then we say, be aware of whatever arises without grasping at it or trying to push it away. And if you do this, then like clouds passing over the horizon, thoughts will slowly disappear. Now I have to say at this point that for many people, they think meditation is about getting rid of thought. And that's the way many people practice, but that's kind of an immature level of meditation. It's a very beginner's meditation. Really, there's no need to get rid of thought, but that's a deep topic and I won't go into it. I'm just going to cover these kind of basic categories of meditation. So we've got this awareness of whatever arises without grasping. Now, how is this a higher level of meditation, let's say, than induction or than just stilling the mind? Well, that's because our end goal is to seek liberation from samsara, right? And what did I say? That liberation is freedom from clinging to self and others. And this is all founded on our negative tendencies. And what are these negative tendencies? Well, this is like desire and aversion, pride, jealousy. These things that kind of disturb and take away our mind. And so, if a thought arises and I chase after it, that itself is a very fundamental form of attachment or desire. We're grasping at something because we want it, we cling to it. This is the real meaning of this attachment. And also, if we try to push thoughts away, reduce thoughts or get rid of them, then that itself is a form of aversion. So this is a very skillful method for kind of subtly reducing this kind of attachment and aversion, this kind of gross negative tendencies. What is this third category? Well, the third category are these techniques that are used to break down our conceptual imputations of clinging to self and reality. It's not like these gross negative tendencies like, I want this, I don't want that. It's about breaking down our conceptual fallacies. We cling very strongly to the reality of a self and the reality of phenomena, but this is not merely based on our gross tendencies. This is based on a fundamental belief in an I, me, and mine. There needs to be some more profound techniques for this. And in the Zen tradition, then they use koans. So these are kind of unsolvable riddles, right? They're riddles that don't really have an answer, and almost anything you say is wrong. And the student takes these riddles, these koans, and they kind of make it into a life's practice. Many people will do just one question for their entire life, and they think about it over and over again. So they have their normal sort of zazen sessions where they're just sitting in the meditation, they have work sessions, but in all their spare time, then they're engaging in this koan, which is kind of a riddle. And this is a way of changing our kind of mental outlook and the way we relate to reality. It works on a very deep level. And again, it's very much like physical exercise. If I was training to do a marathon, then I would have to sort of maybe run on a machine. I would have to go out and do training every day. It's kind of a very practical technique. And sometimes we get too intellectual about these kind of riddles and things. We worry too much about what the answer should be, how we should approach it. In a way, it's merely by holding this in the mind that the work is done. And this is also similar in the Tibetan tradition with the instructions on mind. And so I've got another example of this kind of third type, or this third category, which is primarily about breaking down our conceptual imputations, and that's Shinkantasa. So as we know, this Shinkantasa is basically just sitting. So what do you have to do? Well, you just have to sit. And in that, then, generally, you're just given instructions on how to place the body. But there's no meditation instructions whatsoever. Now, having said that, it seems like everybody teaches this in a different way. So one example, there's this Zen monk. He's teaching online. He's a Westerner. And he says the first stage is to think about or be aware of where the boundary is between body and mind. So you find this place where we conceptually delineate between mind and body. And he said for most people it's around the head. So we think mind is here, body is here, and you meditate on that. And you meditate on that until this border between body and mind becomes indistinct. Once you've achieved that, then you meditate on inner and outer. So what is inner? Well, now this inner is me, this body and this mind complex, and outer is all phenomena that's outside of me, the trees, the sky, the birds, everything. And you meditate in that way until there is no longer any boundary between inner and outer. And then after that, then you meditate on expansive awareness. So that's one instruction that he was giving on Shinkantasa. But that's very different from another instruction I got. And that was similar to this previous stage, and that is to be aware of whatever arises. And it's not the instruction specifically of whatever thought arises, don't follow it. That's slightly different. It's basically, there is no instruction to Shinkantasa. So therefore, at one point, you may be aware of your stomach. You may be aware of a sound. You may be aware of the light in the room. And so in that way, you're not specifically focusing on anything. However, you just remain with whatever is. Now, the clearest instruction I saw online was from this teacher, and he said that there is no instruction. Now, this is difficult for people because you say, sit cross-legged with your back straight, and you sit in this way, and in the Soto tradition, you watch the wall, whatever. And then you do Shinkantasa. And with that, there is no instructions whatsoever. Now, what this teacher said was that they do this for several years. So it's like every morning, 2 hours or something. I'm not exactly sure how long they do it. Maybe it's 1 hour, maybe it's 2 hours. So every day you do this, and they do this for several years. And it's at that point that the teacher starts getting involved. And it becomes a one-to-one interaction. Well, this is very similar to what happens in the Tibetan tradition. It all depends on the teacher-student relationship, and then the teacher will kind of guide the student or inquire into their experience. And so to me, this last presentation of Shikantaza is probably the most authentic. And I think it's the most authentic because to my understanding of what the process is of a teacher reducing a student's conceptual imputations, then this is the kind of method that is very authentic and also works very well. And so why would an instruction like Shikantaza be higher in terms of seeking eventual liberation? And that's because these koans and Shikantaza, what they do is they erode the very foundations of our conceptual imputations from the roots up. And then in the Tibetan tradition, what we have is something called mind instructions, or the quest for mind. And this is what I refer to as the direct path. It's not the result, but it's the direct path. It's the path that's used to come to understand the natural essence. And I've talked a lot about this in many videos, but this type of meditation doesn't really involve a meditation. It's not really like the other ones. It's nothing like that. What this quest for mind is that a student is asked to analyze their personal experience. And it's not about the teacher giving the student instructions. In fact, we tend to think that what we need to do is we need to ask the teacher questions. But in this quest for mind, the student doesn't ask the teacher questions. The teacher asks the student questions. And it's based on that student's answers, because it's from their answers that a teacher can understand the way they perceive things, that the skillful lama, skillful teacher, will guide their student to realizing this unborn, what we call the unborn, what we call the true nature phenomena. It's about what appears to mind. For example, we all have this feeling that we have mind, and also we feel that we have thoughts, right? In fact, often the student will say to the teacher, "I couldn't meditate today, I have too many thoughts." So if the student says to the teacher, "I had too many thoughts today," then the teacher will say, "Really? How many thoughts did you have?" So in this way, the teacher is probing the student's experience. This question, how many thoughts do you have, isn't as superficial as it seems. And there's a lot to be learned into investigating into this. They might say, "Lama, I can't meditate today." "Why can't you meditate?" "Well, I was thinking about what happened yesterday. So-and-so said this to me and it upset me. And when I was trying to meditate, I kept thinking about what happened yesterday." And then the teacher would say, "Really? Are you able to think about yesterday?" And then the student, as soon as they give rise to a doubt, like, "Why did he say that?" Or, "Am I able to think about yesterday?" Then the student has something to do. They have something to do in their meditation. They can go back to their cushion and they can look into, is that valid or not? Can I think about yesterday? Or did I have many thoughts? Likewise, for example, the other day I was talking about this video with Rupert Spira, and the student said to Rupert Spira, "Where do thoughts come from?" Right? Okay, so in the quest for mind, the student wouldn't ask the Lama, "Where do thoughts come from?" The student will say to the Lama, "I couldn't meditate because I had all these thoughts arising." And then the Lama will say to the student, "Really? Well, where did the thoughts come from?" And so that student has to look into their own experience. We assume that thoughts come from somewhere. We kind of have this belief that thoughts arise. So if they arise, we should be able to look into where they came from, right? And so in this way, a student develops personal understanding. And it's not something that's borrowed. When I was talking about the category of induction, I mentioned this video from Rupert Spira. And in that, he's telling the student how it is. He's not asking the student how it is. He's saying there is no distance between the self we seem to be and the self we truly are. Now, that's not what a Mahamudra teacher would do for a student. They're not going to tell them what to do. They're going to ask that student how things are, because it's based on that student investigating their own personal experience that they will come to have some new understanding. And that's what's called wisdom. So within this group, then I've also included Vajrayana sadhana. So these are pujas, and they involve very complex visualizations of mandalas and deities and this sort of thing. Now it's only here because if we were authentically practicing Vajrayana meditation, then it would be the highest form of meditation. One of the highest forms of meditation. Although most Westerners think they can do Vajrayana authentically, they can't. It's almost impossible. I'd say it's impossible for us to do that. For us, really, the Vajrayana practice or Vajrayana meditation only becomes the most profound type of Shamatha meditation. And why do I say that? It's because it's incredibly skillful at developing these qualities of stillness, and mental acuity, and also reduction of our coarse tendencies, our coarse negative tendencies, because it's an incredibly rich method. But to do what it's supposed to do, which is to close the gates of rebirth into samsara, then we're just not equipped for this. I mean, to start off with, we don't even understand it. Really, in order to do authentic Vajrayana practice, you have to have recognized the true nature of mind. So it becomes a type of Mahamudra or Dzogchen meditation. Otherwise, it's just a really, really effective type of shamatha because it has mantras, it has really complex visualizations, it has all kinds of instructions, so the mind has to be incredibly acute. This is one of the most powerful ways to develop awareness and mental acuity, and also to create stillness in the mind. When you do a long Vajrayana sadhana, and if you really apply yourself, at the end, the result is that you have a very stable, very still, and very acute awareness. But in terms of what it's supposed to do, what it says on the box, then we're not able to do that. I mean, each element of the visualizations has a specific resultant state. For example, one will close the gates to rebirth from the womb. One will close the gates to rebirth from an egg, etc., etc., etc. It's incredibly difficult. We're just not able to do it. And to start off with, most of us in the West, when we do Vajrayana practice, we don't even understand what it's talking about. Many people don't even know the language. They can only really say the sounds, and they know a few words, but they don't know Tibetan. So really, it's kind of a joke. Basically, we look at a tanka, like a drawing, of all the mandala and everything we're supposed to visualize, and we think, if we've seen that, and we try to create it in our mind, then we're doing Vajrayana, but it's not that. If you look at the Vajrayana instructions, then it says, visualize this, do this, say this mantra, blah, 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 all these instructions, really complicated. And then at the end it says, but if you know how to rest in the nature of mind, do that instead. So basically, if you've got the Mahamudra or the Dzogchen view, if you've got recognition of the true nature of mind, you can leave aside all that complicated stuff. You can just rest in the Mahamudra. Anyway, this is a huge topic, and I don't want to go into it. So the last one here is this practice of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. Why have I included this here at the end? Is it because I'm really biased towards my own tradition? Yeah, probably I'm just being biased. But I'm basing this on my own experience of doing this stuff. And again, remember, this is for the final result of liberation from samsara, which is the reduction of all clinging to self and phenomena. Right? So to me, I see the reasons. I have a reference point, and I see the reasons why this is kind of the most effective out of all these methods in achieving this. And it's related to why resting in the present awareness without clinging to thoughts and without pushing them away is also more effective than just looking at a black stone. But unless you understand this meditation, then you won't know what I'm talking about. So we think resting in the present awareness is really high level of meditation, or resting in higher consciousness. So what's the difference here? If you say to a Mahamudra practitioner, you have to rest in the present moment, they'd probably raise an eyebrow or even laugh. And there's a reason for that, because they understand what it means, and they understand whether that's possible or not. For example, whether it's possible not to rest in the present moment. And so they would kind of chuckle to themselves about that, because for a Mahamudra practitioner, it doesn't matter if you rest in the present moment or not. That's not an issue. Also, if you were to say, for example, the Zen instruction, watch whatever thoughts arise, don't grasp after them or try to push them away, and then they will pass over the horizon like clouds. Also, a Dzogchen or a Mahamudra practitioner at this point would probably be laughing to themselves. Because this idea of thoughts disappearing over the horizon is kind of funny. And in fact, it doesn't matter where there are thoughts or not thoughts. It doesn't matter even if you cling to thoughts or don't cling to thoughts. It doesn't matter whether you try to rest in the present moment or you're trying to rest in another moment. In terms of the Mahamudra, none of these things matter. And why is that? The only thing that does matter is recognition. Recognition of the essential nature of reality. And so all these other instructions become superfluous. They're no longer necessary once you have this Mahamudra view. And this isn't a matter of doctrine, and this isn't a matter of preference. This is a matter of understanding. It's a matter of recognition. It's not even like worldly knowledge or worldly understanding. It's about recognizing the way things are. And then if you understand the way things are, and somebody makes a statement that is contrary to that, it's self-contradictory because it contradicts the true nature of reality. If you understand that, then when people make fallacious statements, it's very obvious. For somebody who has recognition, then what most people say about meditation, mind, thoughts, reality, is kind of laughable. It's kind of a joke. And that's not an attempt to put anybody down. And somebody who has this kind of recognition wouldn't be putting anybody down. They see for themselves that they themselves had these mistaken assumptions. And these mistaken assumptions were undone by this quest for mind, or this mind instruction, this process which is called the direct path of investigation. Through that, they've recognized their mistaken assumptions, and one by one these mistaken assumptions are dissolved into wisdom. And because of that, then they recognize the mistakes that we make on the spiritual path. So I'm going to get into trouble here. I'm going to get a lot of comments from people saying I'm just being prejudiced, I'm just being a dogmatist, and I'm just pushing my own view on others and putting other people down. But that's not my intention. My intention is merely to share what I've learned on the path in some hope that it might be of use to you. But you should know, if it irritates you or if you get upset, then that's a sign that you're not an advanced spiritual practitioner and you don't have understanding. Because people who have understandings don't get upset with these sort of things. They naturally have compassion, and also they don't cling to things the way that worldly people cling to things. You know, we're always trying to defend ourselves and our own position and those we love and those we're close to and those things that we associate with. Our sense of identity is so strong. And so if anything contradicts our view or the way we see things, we find it very irritating. So I don't want to irritate you. And so now I'll apologize. I mean, I've said before in my videos that if you don't want to be challenged, then you really shouldn't listen to me, because I'm just going to say upsetting things all the time, and I don't mean it to be horrible. So thank you for listening. The sun is going down, it's getting dark, and so see you next time.